Hello, this is Prophecy in the News. I'm Kevin Clarkson, your host, with Bill Salas. Hello, brother.
Hello, brother. It's good to be back with you.
Yeah, good Bible researcher, host of radio show, author, really on top of stuff in the Middle East, and we're going to talk today about that very thing.
Absolutely.
Israel.
Absolutely.
Far from being annihilated, as some are predicting right now, or condemned to nothingness, or even kicked out of the Middle East. You believe any of that, you don't believe the Bible.
Absolutely. You know, the world is trying to get Israel to contract. They're trying to make a lesser Israel, trade land for peace, to guarantee, security over there.
For a piece of land.
Yeah. And that is not biblically endorsed.
That's right.
In fact, Israel's going to become a greater, safer nation, and that's going to happen, I believe, in the very near future.
You know, I as we've discussed, as we prepared for this time, looking at the famous passages in Ezekiel 38 and 39, Israel is resurrected from the grave of nations, comes back, and then in chapter 38, Gog, Magog, the coalition of nations march against her. And as God speaks and warns what will happen, we want to read out of Ezekiel 38, thus saith the Lord God, verse 11, thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages, and that's speaking of Israel.
Mm-hmm.
I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely or in security, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. I will go to take a spoil and to take a prey, to turn thine hand upon the desolate places that are now inhabited, and upon the people that are gathered out of the nations which have gotten cattle and goods that dwell in the midst of the land. Sheba and Dedan, and the merchants of Tarshish, with all the young lions thereof, shall say unto thee, art thou come to take a spoil? Hast thou gathered thy company to take a prey, to carry away silver and gold, to take away cattle and goods, to take a great spoil?
A lot of details in those three verses right
long
there.
Verses, really.
Actually, Ezekiel 38 and 39 are 52 power-packed verses that are probably some of the most defined verses in all of Bible prophecy. And I believe that's the reason for that, Kevin, is that it's the marquee event through which God is going to uphold his holy name and prove that he's the covenant-keeping God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So it's very important and detailed, I think, for very specific purposes. Now, in those verses, we have a very important description of an Israel that is not an Israel that exists presently today as we do this taping. It's an Israel that is dwelling securely in the midst of the land without walls, bars, nor gates. Very wealthy Israel, and ultimately where that Israel is attacked by Gog and Magog, so we would say that's Russia and their consortia of 9 populations, which includes Iran and Turkey and several other populations. And they're going to come against this Israel when it's dwelling in that condition, that greater, safer Israel, which Israel's not dwelling in that condition right now. As we talked about, the world wants to shrink it, but we see here that that's not going to be the case. It's going to be a greater Israel.
And I believe right now they're even building walls. We were talking earlier about on the Sinai Peninsula.
They are. Well, they've got a 403-mile wall that separates Palestinian terror out from Israel proper through the West Bank and things like that. They are also building walls. They've got a wall up around Lebanon, the northern border of Israel. They've got one in the southern border of Israel around Egypt and the Sinai. And they're extending that on through Jordan. So they're not dwelling without walls, bars, nor gates. There's security checkpoints throughout Israel. And they're not dwelling securely. And that's clearly the case, and that's why they're building walls. They've got threats all around them, stemming as far as from Iran's with its nuclear program, with Hezbollah's 100,000 missiles to the north, Syria's chemical weapons, you name it, ISIS moving in, maybe into Jordan next on the borders of Israel. So they're not dwelling securely, but a time will come when they will be dwelling securely.
When will Israel be a greater, safer nation?
Yeah, and we go back 10 chapters in Ezekiel to Ezekiel 28, and it tells us that Israel will dwell securely, the same Hebrew words listed in Ezekiel 38, and it tells us when. That we brought back in the nations, they'll plant vineyards, they'll plant houses, and they will dwell securely when judgments are executed on those around them that despise them. Judgments on the neighborhood over there. And none of the neighborhood, those that share common borders with Israel, that would be Lebanon, where you've got Hezbollah, Syria, where you've got the ISIS, and you've got Jordan and Saudi Arabia and Egypt, and you've got the Hamas in the Gaza, and you've got the Palestinians. They are all listed in their own separate prophecy in Psalm 83. They're
Exactly.
clearly identified there, and we've talked about that on the program before. So I believe sequentially Israel has to win a war in Psalm 83 and get rid of the Arab threat around them. They can then dwell securely. They don't need walls around Jordan and the West Bank and things like that. And then they can dwell securely. They will be a greater, safer Israel. Now, several prophecies tell us that when they win that war, they will expand territorially. They were given land from the river of Egypt, the Nile, to the river Euphrates, which courses through Iraq and Syria, in Genesis 15:18 through their father Abraham. Right? That's called the Promised Land. Now, when they win wars, they tend to expand their borders. And Jeremiah 49:1-6 talks about them taking over Jordan. Obadiah 1 verses 19 and 20 talks about them taking over the West Bank on into southern parts of Lebanon. Zephaniah 2 verses 8 and 9 talk about them taking over the Gaza area. It'll be for fields of flocks with their shepherds for ancient tribal land of Judah. So we see that they're going to expand territorially. They won't need walls. There'll be a greater, safer Israel, and more prosperous Israel. Now, I do like to let the audience know they're probably not going to get all of the promised land until Jesus returns. But I do believe there's enough supporting scriptures that they can expand incrementally, as they did in 1967 when they won that war, into those borders. So we're looking pretty comfortable to say that don't believe what the news is telling you. The diplomacy is going to fail. The land for peace deals have not been working. Israel is going to win a war and expand territorially, and they're going to become a greater and safer Israel, setting the stage for Ezekiel 38. And that's got all kinds of complexities for Islam and for America and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and that's what's fascinating, and we'll follow that up in a moment. Do you see anything in Israel right now that is forward-looking enough to plan for this kind of day, or do you think they're just in a survivalist mindset?
Well, it's interesting. You got kind of both things going on, paralleling the fact that they are concerned about their very existence. I mean, they're preparing for wars against Hezbollah, maybe to attack Iran's nuclear facilities. That could happen at any given time.
That's true.
But they are also becoming a very prosperous nation. They're discovering natural gas in the Mediterranean Sea, and other things, and their economy is actually doing really quite well. Remember, Russia's coming after a very robust, prosperous Israel for plunder and booty. So we see that developing. Is that wealthy Israel in place that Russia would put together such a formidable coalition? Not yet, and Israel's not dwelling securely yet. But a time will come where they will dwell securely and they'll be very wealthy, and that will entice Russia to put its coalition together, which, by the way, it's a predominantly Muslim coalition, just like Psalm 83. The 10 countries listed in Psalm 83 that share common borders with Israel, they are all Muslim. And most of the populations in Ezekiel 38, different nations entirely in Psalm 83, are predominantly all Muslim except for Russia. So you've got two major Muslim wars that are going to face off against Israel and get defeated. And so that's going to be devastating for Islam.
And let's remember that, there is a lot of Islamic infiltration or immigration into southern Russia. And I had an insider tell me this year that about 1 out of every 10 Russian military are Islamic.
Yeah, let's talk about what this means, this picture of Israel. What does that mean for Islam? Want to go there for a few minutes? Okay, I think it spells disaster for Islam. And you're right about Russia. Estimates are that more than 50% of its population would turn Muslim given enough time, and I think we would take that out to around 2050. I've seen those estimates as well, Kevin. But regardless of that time, because I don't frankly think we're going to be around till 2050, personally. I think this war is going to occur before then. The stage is already being set. Russian relationships with Turkey and Iran and these members involved in the coalition with Russia, those bonds are already being made, okay? So we see that this is already, it's very near. I just don't think it's next because I think Psalm 83 has to happen beforehand. But, so Israel wins a war in Psalm 83 against the Arab Muslims that surround them, and the Israeli Defense Forces are the tool of victory used in that. And I point that out in my Psalm 83 book and the Psalm 83 DVDs and things like that that you guys offer. But Israel's defense forces is not involved in the defeat of the Gog of Magog invasion, that big Russian coalition in Ezekiel 38, nor is America. It's God who stops that. It's God who, through fire, hailstone, and brimstone, stops that formidable, most massive Mideast invasion of all times. But regardless, Israel's defense forces win one war, God stops the other. You have just taken out more than 50% of the world's Muslim populations when that happens. Psalm 83 is a punch to the gut of Islam. Ezekiel 38 is an uppercut to the jaw. I believe those are pre-tribulation events. So by the time you get to the start of the tribulation, the vibrant Islam of today that's got everybody nervous with ISIS moving around in the Middle East and that sort of thing is much more compromised and degraded by the time we get to the tribulation. It won't be the end of Islam, because Islam is into Indonesia, it's into Europe, it's into various places at this point. But it's not going to be the same Islam. And many Muslims are already questioning Allah's Akbar, his greatness, right? Because they're seeing that they can't stop this little tiny Israel through the wars they've had in 48, 67, and 73. So I think it spells disaster for Islam. I'm very concerned about what it might mean for America, because we are not on the right side of Israel right now. And yet God is going to use Israel to uphold his holy name. Matter of fact, if you would be so kind to read Ezekiel 39, verse 7. Let's go there, and then let me talk about how that's why it's important for us to recognize what God's going to do in that prophecy. Ezekiel 39, verse 7, and let me set the stage for your reading. God has told us in Ezekiel 38, verses 16 through Ezekiel 39, 6, how he is going to stop through fire, hailstone, and earthquake, and brimstone, this Old Testament divine stoppage of that formidable invasion. And then this is what he says in the aftermath of his victory.
So will I make my holy name known in the midst of my people Israel, and I will not let them pollute my holy name anymore. And the heathen shall know that I am the Lord, the Holy One in Israel.
So this is what it all boils down to. This is the marquee event that the world theater is being set for, in my estimation. Yes, the Psalm 83 prophecy is important. Yes, Isaiah 17. Any Bible prophecy is obviously important. Okay? But where this is going, this regathering of the Jewish people into the land of Israel, where they'll someday dwell securely, there'll be a greater, safer Israel, very prosperous, and then Russia's coming after that. Ultimately, God is going to use that episode, that prophetic episode, to uphold his holy name in the midst of his people Israel. It requires an Israel. It requires Israelis, Jewish people. And what is it going to say in that victory? How is he going to uphold his holy name? He's going to say, look, there's a proof positive in what you just saw. I stopped them, not America, not the Israeli Defense Forces, but God himself stopped them. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he made an unconditional promise through Abraham. It's God's plan of redemption for man, that he would have descendants forever. They would have a promised land, a chosen people, a promised land. We talked about the metes and bounds of that land. And that was an unconditional covenant that God made with Abraham. And he's going to say, look, I'm a promise keeper. I have upheld my covenant. Russia tried to stop it. Hitler tried to destroy the Jews. I just proved myself to everybody. And now the world, you are on official notice. The nation shall know he's the Lord. You're on official notice, and you need to know now to make the right choice, because an Antichrist is coming on the scene here, and he's going to vie for your attention. So you got God, Jehovah, the Bible, who proved himself as a covenant keeper, and here comes the Antichrist. And I believe that's a pre-trib event, Ezekiel 38, and I spell out the various reasons for that in my teachings.
Well, that's good. And, of course, as you've said, but just to capsulize it, Psalm 83 and the consort of nations that are right around Israel, them being destroyed, removing Islam so close, allows this broader coalition of Islamic nations led by Russia. So the one leads to the other eventually, and in between, Israel gains strength and security.
Yeah, it's a 1-2 punch.
Exactly.
And Psalm 83 is a big deal, don't get me wrong.
It's going to be like Armageddon. I mean, the whole result is there's carnage, there's destruction, but when all the smoke clears, Jehovah is God.
Yeah, well,
and everybody knows.
That's Ezekiel 38.
Yeah.
Psalm 83, as big as it is, Ezekiel 38 is the granddaddy.
That's right.
I mean, it's the bigger deal. Ultimately, you have an Armageddon campaign. And that's when the Antichrist leads the armies of the world against Israel in the Great Tribulation, the second half of the 7-year tribulation period. But we've got 3 distinct different battles, and I enumerate on the various reasons why we know they're distinctly different.
Yeah.
1, Israeli Defense Forces stop Psalm 83. 2, God Jehovah stops Ezekiel 38. 3, Jesus Christ stops the Antichrist.
Amen.
In Isaiah 63. He comes down and rescues the remnant, faithful remnant held up in southern Jordan, Petra, ancient Edom, in Isaiah 63. So very powerful, important information. And we've talked about a greater Israel, and we've talked about a decline of Islam. but what about America? See, we are in a very critical condition, this country, and a lot of concerns being expressed by some of these prophetic voices out there. Jonathan Cahn and many others are very concerned.
Well, let's just bait our breath and hold that a minute, because I want to tell people what Bill we're offering that elaborates on this. Two of your teachings, Psalm 83, is available with 3 DVD discs. And with that in a bundle is your teaching America and the Coming Mideast Wars. And then we're throwing in with that a reprint of J.R. Church's classic book, Guardians of the Grail, that also includes a bonus DVD presentation of Brother Church teaching. So all of that wrapped, bundled together for $49.95. And if you want to follow these and learn deeper insights, this is a great set. And call the 800 number on your screen, or go to our website at prophecyinthenews.com. Now, I know everyone is interested to hear what this means and spells out for America.
Well, I'm excited that you're actually presenting J.R.'s Guardian of the Grail book. I'm going to take a quote from that book in just a moment.
Great.
As I explain my concerns for America. You had read in Ezekiel 38, verse 13, you had read about Sheba, Dedan, the merchants of Tarshish, and their young lions.
Young lions.
So let me preface this. In Ezekiel 38, you've got Israel, and then you've got 9-member coalition of Russia, so you've got 10 participants. But then you've got these other 4 that you read about, Sheba and Dedan. Dedan would be Saudi Arabia. Sheba would be Yemen. But who are the merchants of Tarshish and their young lions, right? Well, there's 2 primary arguments about that. One is the merchants of Tarshish would be Spain, and from there out came the colonies of Central America and South America, etc. Or the other argument that I favor, and I think it's much more biblically supported, would be the UK would be the merchants of Tarshish and their young lions. Of course, America is part of the colonization, and out, of course, came from there. J.R. Church actually writes in his book, The Guardians of the Grail, that you're offering here, and they're reprinting. He says on page 220, at least in the first print of the book, that was where it was, there's an inscription discovered in 1780 on a cliff above Mount Hope Bay in Bristol, Rhode Island. It contained an engraving that read, "Voyagers from Tarshish, this stone proclaims," believed to be inscribed around 533 B.C. Now, Harvard University has found 5 locations within the United States where the merchants of Tarshish had colonies. Now, that's an abbreviated quote. He actually writes more about that. I agree with him. I think this is where we find America in Bible prophecy. And we have, Tarshish, a lot of the archaeologists believe that was the ancient name for Britain, and that it was where it was often called beyond the Gibraltar. Well, the Strait of Gibraltar is where Spain meets Morocco, and around the side, now you get over in the British Isles. Now we find out in other verses, when we start to understand Tarshish, they show up quite a bit in Scripture. So we'll spend a moment on talking about that. As far as it goes dealing with isles related to Tarshish, Psalm 72 talks about it, Isaiah 23, Isaiah 60, and Isaiah 66. So clearly Tarshish is related to isles. Spain's not related to any isles at all. The UK, Britain, they are a big islands is really what essentially they are. So we've got that. Now also Tarshish was known for its vast wealth and seaworthy ships. They would come with abundance. For instance, there's a quote in Ezekiel 27:12, "Tarshish was thy merchant," referring to Tyre, which is in Lebanon. "By reason of the multitude of all kinds of riches, with silver, iron, tin, and lead, they traded in thy fairs." So they're merchants, and that's what it says in Ezekiel 38, the merchants of Tarshish. So Tarshish as merchant shows up 7 times in Scripture. So they were very wealthy peoples wherever they came from. And then their seaworthy ships, it talks about their seaworthy ships over 11 times. They could go for months at a time. So they could come all the way from the UK and make their way all around through there. So I think it's clearly evident that they are involved. That's where we would find America. But here's the concern. We're sitting on the sidelines in verse 13 going to Russia. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to take this great plunder and booty from this secure Israel? And it says the merchants of Tarshish and their young lions. It's not talking about the politicians, the athletes, the entertainers. It's talking about the merchants. Someone wants to have commerce with that robust Israel. And I think that's the UK and that's America. And now we're protesting. We're not fighting alongside Israel. Fortunately, we're not fighting alongside Russia against Israel. But where are we? Why
We're
are we
stepping
from
back.
Why are we from the superpower status, Israel's best friend that should come along and would have come along at any given point in modern history, to a point now where we've actually turned our back on Israel?
Mm-hmm.
The president administration has many people very concerned in Israel about their support in Washington for Israel. And so I see us in a different position. I see a greater Israel coming in this prophecy, and I see a lesser America coming in this prophecy. Very, very troubling.
Well, that's certainly things that fit in with what we're concerned about with the United States, our moral climate, or immoral climate, our economy, just the factions in Washington, D.C., and the fact that we are not standing with Israel, as you mentioned.
Yeah, you know, Kevin, for a long time, I think, when was the abortion? Was it Roe versus Wade? That was 73, I believe.
Yes.
It was. You know, we've had abortion since that time. We're almost nearing 60 million abortions,
Right.
at the rate of about a million abortions a year.
God's justice will not sleep forever.
Immorality has plagued this nation. We really did basically kick God out of this culture and government, you know, several decades back. We've got all kinds of problems as a result of that. As far as the fabric of this country, truth has become relevant within the teachings. And, you know, we're in a position now where I think God is warning this country. Now, when we turn our back on Israel, remember that God's foreign policy 4,000 years ago issued to Abraham is, I'll bless those who bless you, Genesis 12, but I'll curse those who curse you. That extrapolates on through to the Jewish people, through Isaac and Jacob, and through the 12 tribes on the Jewish people. That foreign policy for the Gentiles is still intact. So we need to be blessing Israel, and for many decades we did. But that is not the case right now. We are compromising Israel. I mean, the Obama administration's popularity in Israel has gone down to zilch at this point in time. They're very concerned that we're putting them into a corner in the midst of the worst time, when ISIS is barreling down and Iran's getting a nuclear program put together and all this sort of thing. So my concern is we've turned our back on Israel. Recently, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of same-sex marriages. That was on June 26 of 2015, which at one point, and I'll give a quote from Dr. David Reagan, came out with an article immediately, a well-known prophecy teacher, and he said, mark this on your calendar, June 26, 2015 was the day that America died. Okay, that's how concerned he was about it. He's one of those prophetic voices sounding the alarm. So what do we have here? What God does when he deals with a nation is he gives them remedial judgments to warn them. They're slipping out of his will. They're kicking him out of their culture and out of their government. What have we had? We had the hedge of protection came down when the towers came down on September 11th. Jonathan Cahn points this out in his teachings of the Harbinger. We then had the worst hurricane season, hurricane in our history, costliest disasters, Hurricane Katrina in August 2005, followed by another Category 5 Hurricane Rita in September 2005. We had the mortgage implosion in 2007, the economic crisis, which led to a global economic crisis in 2008, which happened to be a year of a Shemitah cycle, just like it was back when the towers came down in 2001. So in September of 2008, another Shemitah 7-year cycle, which we've talked about in various programs, and Jonathan Cahn's been on your program with his teaching on that. We had the biggest oil spill in our nation's history in 2010, the BP oil spill. We've had the worst tornado seasons in 2011. You know, we've got a point now where all kinds of problems are happening in this country. We've had first graders shot at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut, which was dubbed as America's safest town. We've had the remedial judgments. Then God lifts up prophetic voices to warn the people, the Jeremiahs of our time. And you look, Joe Rosenberg wrote a book called Implosion, dealing with America. Terry James wrote a book, you've had him on the show, American Apocalypse. Mark Hitchcock wrote a book, The Late Great United States. Jonathan Cahn's warning about the harbingers. Those prophetic voices have been sounding the alarms. The remedial judgments have happened. And then it comes down to the last thing, which is you get the leadership you deserve. You know, look at King Saul when the Israelites were going down and being conquered by the Philistines. You know, King Saul, the king they had to have. You know, like all the Gentile nations, the Jewish nation needed a king. And so I guess we have to ask ourselves the question, have we been given the leadership we deserve, where we can now rule that the law of the land is that same-sex marriages should be acceptable and that sort of thing. And I'm telling you that I'm very, very concerned that if God doesn't judge this country now, and I'm going to quote Billy Graham, I think it was, who said, if God didn't judge, you know, America, or I think he said San Francisco, where the homosexuality was rampant a while back, then he owes Sodom and Gomorrah an apology.
Yeah.
That's where we're at, I think, and I'm very concerned, and I think we find ourselves as a lesser country as Israel becomes a greater country, a greater Israel, in Ezekiel 38.
Well, Bill Salas, that is challenging to me. It's fascinating. It makes me want to stay and stand with Israel. It makes me want to pray for my nation, pray for my life to be all it needs to be. And if you're watching today, let's be reminded from all of this, we speak of God and knowing him, but God is the God of the nations as well. He rules over this entire earth. And he sets up kings and takes them down. He raises armies and lets them be defeated. And none can thwart his purpose. So you may feel like you're one person out of 7 billion on the planet, and you are, and so am I. The Lord loves us individually, but let's realize he's got the whole world in his hands. And it all points to the fact that he is working a plan and a purpose. And he's on a timetable, and he promised when all things were ready that Jesus Christ, his son, would return. And Jerusalem really is ground zero. Jesus will come back to the Mount of Olives where he left almost 2,000 years ago and ascended back into heaven. This same Jesus will so come in like manner with the clouds, visibly, physically, in a body that he was resurrected in. And the important thing is that you and I would know him. And so we always want to give the appeal to you. If you've never trusted Christ, maybe you're fascinated about current events or geopolitical factors, or maybe you have an interest in history or prophecy, but you most of all need to know the God who made you. So call on his name. Ask Jesus Christ to come into your life, forgive your sin, change you from the inside out. And it's called salvation. And you'll join the rest of us who keep looking up.